TNT.
Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. I'm Marty Goldensohn, sitting in for Brian, who's on vacation. But he's sort of here, on tape, conducting 3 interviews. 2 with major newsmakers, Deputy Secretary of State John Negroponte and presidential hopeful John McCain. Also, we'll enjoy his chat with a major news mocker, George Carlin.
We can't even utter some of these words that are all right. We've had to take something, the B word, the F word, we've had to take something that's been reserved for profanity previously and apply it to ordinary words now, which to me is just a sign of how uncomfortable we are with expression.
But first, here are this week's online video picks. Think you need a spinmeister to support a presidential candidate? Check out how this Barack Obama supporter, an amateur at a rally in LA, hung tough when a skeptical questioner kept following up.
So why are you for Obama?
Because I feel like he is the best qualified candidate. I think that he's got an excellent chance to win, especially against McCain. I think he's got...
Why is he the best qualified?
Well, I feel like he's a person who actually represents positive change in society and who can bring together a broad swath of people.
How is he doing that specifically? Do you have any specifics?
Specifics?
Yeah, do you have any technical versus emotional specifics?
I'll tell you, here's what I see on the technical specifics. Technically, Edwards, Obama, and Clinton are virtually identical. There are minor changes and differences in some of their policies, particularly in healthcare.
What are their policies, do you know?
All of them represent universal healthcare, although Obama's plan is not exactly universal in the same way that Hillary's is.
How will they institute universal healthcare?
How will they institute universal healthcare?
How will they pay for it? How will they socialize it? How will it be physically accomplished?
I think that's one of the big things. The reason why I like Obama's plan is because it's one that's voluntary. So part of the way in which it gets paid for is by both the worker and the employer, as opposed to just by the government, which I don't think is really feasible.
Isn't that what we have now? It's called voluntary insurance, Blue Cross for $160 a month?
We do, but the problem is the costs are too high. So with Obama's program, we have subsidies for people who can't afford to pay, and that's something we don't have right now.
Isn't that Medicaid?
No,
Medicare?
Medicaid only applies to a small swath of people based on age and based upon income.
All right. So you would broaden that to cover more people?
Exactly.
Well, we've had, let's see, 50 hospitals, community hospitals, closed here in LA County in the last 10 years due to them bearing the cost of free medical care for people that aren't insured. So if we insure these people, will these hospitals open back up?
Well, a couple of things. One, I doubt that the hospitals will open back up, and I do think that we need to have a different model for how we finance it.
Like what?
Well, it's got to be a public-private partnership. That's what I'm talking about. I like in Obama's principle. Because if you have straight-up socialized medicine, it's very hard to really cover everybody. Exactly. So you've got to have some kind of...
Because the doctors just raise the cost.
Exactly.
The corporations with the MRI machines is still $1 million for an MRI machine.
Exactly.
Nice job on the front lines. But hanging tough wasn't so easy for Democrats in this Fox News focus group conducted by Republican pollster Frank Luntz.
Here's my question, because the likability I understand about Barack Obama. Can you ask your audience to name any one specific accomplishment that they know of?
Okay. Can you name me a specific accomplishment of Barack Obama? Lori. Can you name one?
Community organizer?
Can you name one?
No.
No?
His experience with the elderly.
He's a great orator like Jesse Jackson.
What's that?
It's reform bill in Congress.
What?
Yes.
Inspirational.
So basically, you're giving all his attributes rather than his...
I want to thank them for driving shots.
That's what they're doing.
Frank, that's my point. They just like the personality. They can't name a specific thing, and they're going to vote this guy president.
You're going to hurt your hand if you keep doing that.
I don't get that.
Gotcha. Of course, they could have mentioned things like the Illinois State Senate bill he sponsored making police officers videotape interrogations, or opposing the Iraq War early on, or being president of the Harvard Law Review, but I guess they didn't think of those things. Video pick number 3, still on Obama. Have you seen the music video Obama supporters made in the music world? Well, we played it last week by performer will.i.am.
It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed the trail toward freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Well, it didn't take long for some people to start spoofing that song. Within a week, someone was using it to campaign against John McCain.
The work that we face in our time is great. In a time of war and the terrible sacrifices it entails, the promise of a better future is not always clear. There's going to be other wars. I'm sorry to tell you, there's going to be other wars. We're going to have a lot of combat wounds, and my friends, it's going to be tough. We're going to have a lot to do.
That old Beach Boys song, Bomberan.
I'm still convinced that withdrawal means chaos, and if you think that things are bad now, if we withdraw, you ain't seen nothing yet. You ain't seen nothing yet.
A good idea, worth the price and blood trade.
It was a good idea.
President Bush has talked about our staying in Iraq for 50 years.
Maybe 100. Maybe 100. That's fine with me. Maybe 100. That's fine with me.
100 years?
I don't think Americans are concerned if we're there for 100 years or 1,000 years or 10,000 years. 10,000 years. 10,000 years.
Video pick number 4. Obama might be ahead when it comes to fundraising on the web, but Hillary wants you to know that she is online too.
Hi everyone, this is Hillary, and this is a thank you to each of you, because from day one, this campaign has been about your voice, your dreams, your concerns, and your support. You've knocked on doors, you've made phone calls and donated in record numbers. In the last week alone, you went to HillaryClinton.com and donated over $10 million to this campaign. I can't tell you how thankful I am that when I needed you most, you gave the most. I want to thank each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart. But the best way I can thank you is to continue to stand up and fight for you, for all of you who can't afford health care, who are worried about keeping your home, who fear for your children's future. And I will keep fighting 24/7, every single waking hour. One of my favorite poets once wrote, "I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep." Well, so do I. And I intend to keep them to you, to the people of our country, to this wonderful, wonderful place we call America, and to our world. And with your help, that is what we will do together. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you, you're far too kind. And web video pick number 5, human technology in action or not in action, in a performance art piece called Frozen Grand Central by the group Improv Everywhere.
That guy over there?
They stopped what they were doing and just stood like frozen.
How long has this been happening?
I don't know.
I just walked in. Has it been going on for a while?
No, just noticed. So. This guy just dropped the papers a couple minutes ago. About a minute ago, not even.
Look at that lady over here.
It's like everybody.
Yeah.
Can't move my car. There's hundreds of people frozen everywhere. This is wild.
This is so weird.
I don't understand what's going on.
I don't either.
I think it's some kind of protest, probably. It's either that or an acting class.
No, they are not moving. I can't move my car. I need some help. Never mind. They're moving.
That is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I thought it was only me who was seeing it for a little while.
And those are this week's online video picks. I'm Marty Goldensohn, sitting in at Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. On January 31st, Deputy Secretary of State John Negroponte appeared at the Japan Society in an event that Brian hosted. It turned to the subject of torture. Let's watch some excerpts from that conversation.
Now, last week you reportedly became the first U.S. official to publicly disclose that the United States has used waterboarding. The National Journal quoted you as saying, "Waterboarding has not been used in years. It wasn't used when I was Director of National Intelligence, nor for even a few years before that." Can you confirm that quote and tell us why you acknowledge the practice?
I will limit myself to confirming the accuracy of that quote and its content on the one hand, and I will also add that subsequent to that interview, which actually although it was only published a few days ago, it was conducted in December. Subsequent to the publication of that interview, the Attorney General, in a letter dated a couple of days ago, wrote to Senator Leahy, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, that waterboarding is not currently an authorized interrogation technique. Okay.
You were Director of National Intelligence when the CIA interrogation tapes were destroyed in 2005, and I've read that you said that you advised that the tapes not be destroyed. Mm-hmm. What's at stake, in your opinion, with this matter for the rule of law at home and for America's image abroad?
Yeah. First of all, to be candid with you, I do not recall the incident. I did not recall it when there was publicity came out about it. And what has been published was based apparently on some email exchanges that attribute certain views to me. I think under the circumstances, and since this is a matter under investigation, I think that I probably ought not to make any further comment about this, other than to say that I have confidence that these inquiries will get to the bottom of the situation.
Just to clarify what you said, though, these emails that were attributed to you, you don't have a recollection of the matter of these particular tapes?
Until this issue was written about, I had frankly forgotten that this issue might have existed in any way, shape, or form. Apparently what these emails suggest is that that somebody had suggested to me that these tapes, first of all, existed, and secondly, that they be destroyed, and apparently the emails suggest that I objected to that. I said I didn't think that would be a good idea. Now, some people will say, well, now how can you possibly not, vividly remember something like this? And the fact of the matter is that one handles and deals with so many different issues in any given day or time. I just didn't happen to recall this situation. And it came up, I don't even know the circumstances in which it came up. It was a conversation with somebody, presumably.
On the larger question of the implications of these topics for your work as a diplomat representing the United States around the world, some people say that these kinds of things are actually undoing the work of fighting al-Qaeda that the administration is trying to do at other levels, because it seeds their recruitment. It helps their recruitment, even as we fight al-Qaeda on the battlefield, etc. Are you concerned that the Bush administration has not performed well because of some of its actions in a way that may come back to hurt us directly in national security?
I think that I think what I would say to that is we're a democratic society, we're an open society. When questions like this come to light, I think one of the virtues of our democracy, one of the virtues of our institutions, is that we are capable of taking corrective steps. And I think that's what has happened in some of the instances that have occurred during the course of the war on terror. I think perhaps one of the best examples is the very, very awful situation which arose with respect to Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. But corrective steps have been taken, and I'm impressed with the way our society can, because of its democratic institutions, because of its openness, and has a way of being able to absorb these kinds of jolts, if you will, take corrective action, and then move forward in a constructive way. So it hasn't, these events have not shaken my faith, either in the fundamental soundness of our democracy or in our ability to play a leadership role in world affairs.
The Bush administration is reported now to be negotiating a long-term agreement with Iraq that could include permanent military bases and other military joint security commitments that some of the major presidential candidates seem to object to strongly. Would it be fair of the Bush administration to take any such controversial steps shortly before an election?
Look, the key issue that we will be confronting at the end of this year, on December 31st, is that the Security Council resolution that governs the presence of coalition forces in Iraq will expire, and successor arrangements have to be negotiated for that resolution, because the government of Iraq has said that this year is the last year that they are prepared to accept foreign forces operating on their soil under a Chapter 7 Security Council resolution. So that and at the same time, I think even critics of our involvement in Iraq acknowledge that there will be most likely a need for the continued presence of United States forces in Iraq after December 31st. And I think most of us would say that they'll be required for some time to come. So we will have to come to some kind of understanding with the government of Iraq over the next several months.
Would you be
about the need for a continued United States and probably coalition military presence in Iraq?
Would that be open-ended enough, since it doesn't expire until December 31st, to continue after the election to include the views of whoever the new president is?
You're getting me into a hypothetical there, but it's an issue that's got to be resolved before December 31st, and it would just be something that would enable or empower U.S. forces to continue to operate there, which I think is, again, something that everybody really, even as a practical matter.
But the question is on what terms?
Any president of the United States at whatever point is going to be able to, there's no way that we can tie the hands of the next president of the United States. I mean, he's the commander-in-chief, and he's going to be able to decide how he wishes to see United States forces deployed.
I guess I need to say he or she.
That was part of an interview with John Negroponte, a longtime member of the Bush administration and a current Deputy Secretary of State.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hi, I'm Matthew Goldstein, the Chancellor of the City University of New York. Look who's teaching at CUNY. Michio Kaku, string field theorist and international authority on theoretical physics. John Corigliano, Academy Award and Pulitzer Prize winner in music. David Nassau, winner, Bancroft Prize for Best Biography. Jill Barganetti, Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers. Gregory Rabassa, recipient the National Medal of Arts in 2006 from President Bush. Elizabeth Nunez, winner, American Book Award. Godfrey Gumbs, American Physical Society Fellow and member, New York Academy of Sciences. World-class talent, award-winning scholars, CUNY is their classroom, CUNY is your university.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. When Brian interviewed Senator John McCain back in September, McCain's campaign was at a low point. What a difference 5 months makes. Let's revisit the interview now that McCain is the presumptive nominee. The pitch to New Yorkers must have worked.
Senator McCain, thanks so much for joining us. You're speaking to a New York audience today, so tell us, why would you be the best president of the United States for New York?
Because I would keep New York safe, and I believe that I'm capable of preventing another terrorist attack on America, but most importantly, I am most qualified to lead in the transcendent issue of the 21st century, which is the challenge of radical Islamic extremism.
You know, our former mayor, very well known here, says the exact same thing. Why do you think you can beat Rudy Giuliani in his own backyard on the issue of terrorism?
It's not the issue of terrorism. It's the struggle against radical Islamic extremism, which is going to be a long twilight struggle. This is a force of evil that's been unleashed in the world. And I'm a great admirer of Mayor Giuliani's. I believe that my life, my experience, my knowledge and background give me the qualifications that might lend me to their consideration.
Better than him? Why? Can you say?
The qualifications, simply qualifications, my background, my knowledge. I can give you one example, and that is that I was the only one who's running for president, and I don't like to compare myself to anyone specifically, that railed against the Rumsfeld strategy, which failed, and I predicted was going to fail, and I fought for the strategy that is now succeeding. No one else running for president argued that, because frankly they don't have the military and national security credentials that I do, and I think they're all fine people. Question is, who can lead the country in this struggle?
When you look at the many stories in this book, and it's interesting that it's not just called Great Leadership, it's called Hard Call, Great Decisions and the Extraordinary People Who Made Them. Does something tie together some of the many hard calls that people had to make?
I think what ties them together at the end of the day, whether they had time to take in consideration all the factors and weigh and assess, at the end of the day is whether it was an act that entailed a benefit or an act of goodness and decency that was greater than the self-interest of the individual. And it is my belief, and it's been my theme in this book and others, that to serve a cause greater than yourself is the noblest of all pursuits, and frankly, it's the most rewarding.
I mentioned your presence on YouTube. Do you think YouTube is good for democracy?
Sure. I think YouTube is good for democracy, and I think we will mature and recognize that maybe sometimes politicians do make mistakes and do things that are a little bit stupid, but people deserve to know about them, and I think it's a good thing. Just like I think that Jon Stewart is a good thing, even though he makes fun of me all the time.
I think you're the most frequent of all his guests, aren't you?
I'm the most frequent of his guests, which means there must be a trace of masochism. Must be a trace of masochism somewhere in my family.
Did you ever go to comedy school?
No, I never did. But humor is important. Humor is important in politics. We've had some who are natural at it. Reagan was pretty good at humor, and some others, but I think it's important for us to try to use humor as much as possible, even though it's a very dangerous enterprise.
David Brooks wrote yesterday in his New York Times column, or earlier this week, that the future of the Democratic Party is not online, despite what the Netroots people would like us to believe. What do you think about that with respect to the Democrats or the Republicans? Is the web changing democracy, or does it just have that appearance?
I'm a great admirer of David Brooks, but I think that the internet, I think websites, I think YouTube, that I think that what way they're, quote, changing is they're providing people with more information. Therefore, I think they make better judgments, and so I think it's a good thing. It is more evolutionary than perhaps that some think, but it is anytime Americans get more information, then I have greater confidence in their judgment. That's what all this has done for them.
I don't know if you've thought about this, but some people say the web divides people even more into political camps than we already have been because they go to websites with like-minded people.
I think it's probably true, but most Americans, I think, particularly young ones, go to all the websites. They also want to be entertained, and I understand that. But I'm not worried so much about what happens in the websites and the polarization. I worry more about we in Washington doing our duty, that stopping the corruption, cleaning up the spending, taking on the hard issues. Look, Social Security is going to go broke. We all know it. What have we done about it lately? We're going to hand it on to another generation. What about Medicare? What about, in other words, Americans are dissatisfied with us not because they know more about us because of the internet, but because they see that we aren't doing what we were sent to do.
You've been active in media policy in the Congress. Do you have a position on net neutrality?
I think that net neutrality is something that we have to look at from time to time, but I don't want to see the wealthiest and most powerful entrant into the internet crowd out the independence, which really is what given its strength and vitality. It's a very tough issue. But by the way, it's one that's not tough. Internet taxes. We've got to extend permanently, in my view, the internet tax moratorium.
I wonder about campaign advertising and election law on the web. You're obviously interested in campaign finance, McCain-Feingold. Some people think Fred Thompson got a free ride in the way he was able to spend money on the web this summer before declaring as a candidate.
I would not support campaign finance laws imposed on the web. It's still a young and very immature technology, and I don't think that McCain-Feingold applies.
Why not? Wouldn't that make the web, which is becoming our dominant medium, a gigantic campaign finance loophole?
I think the gigantic finance loophole right now is the 527s, and they're advertising on television.
The independent interest groups, everything from MoveOn.org to the National Rifle Association, things like that?
Exactly, yes. And I think it's a gigantic loophole that's there already.
The Supreme Court weakened McCain-Feingold.
Yep.
Is there anything left of it that matters?
They only weakened one part of it. I think you're going to see a lot more, quote, issue ads as the election nears. But the major achievement of that law was to stop the soft money, which we know corrupted Washington. We have former members of Congress in federal prison. It stopped the ability of a union leader, a trial lawyer, a corporate head from being called by a member of Congress and say, I need a 7-figure check from you. That stopped. I need a 7-figure check from you, and your bill is up before my committee next week. That's been stopped, and I think that's been very beneficial.
You know, I thought I read somewhere that you were against net neutrality legislation on the grounds that the market would provide. Do I have that wrong?
Look, I go back and forth on this issue, and I sometimes I think I understand the requirement that we not have anybody have an advantage, and then there's other times frankly I haven't really taken a firm and hard position on it, and that's one of the few that I haven't. I continue to look at it. It's a very tough issue.
This is where I want to ask you what you're going to announce at the Hudson Institute with the promised embargo.
We've talked about the need to expand the military, the need to do a much better job with our intelligence services, the much needed improvement in military corps that trains and equips our allies, a necessity to move the U.S. Information Agency out of the State Department and back into an independent role. They have not carried out much of their basic functions, and basically an overall assessment of what's happening in Iraq and what needs to happen. And among things that need to be happen is the Maliki government functioning effectively.
You said expanding the military. How so?
We all know, because of the stress on our Guard and Reserve, that we need a much larger active duty Marine Corps and Army. The Marine Corps and Army are 1/3 smaller than they were at the time of the first Gulf War. And so I don't think there's any doubt that we need to expand it if we're going to relieve the burden. Even if we wind down from Iraq, we are going to have continued obligations in Afghanistan and other obligations throughout the world.
When the war was in its early stages, if I remember correctly, you were calling for much more than 130,000 or 160,000 troops in order to do the job properly. Can we do it now with 130,000, or is that just a formula for a quagmire?
I believe General Petraeus when he tells me that he has sufficient number of troops. Am I nervous about it? Of course. But I think there's some realities, and that is the overall size of the Army and Marine Corps, which are significant constraints, and we have put a burden on the National Guard and the reserves that is something that we've never asked of the Guard and Reserve before.
You've been outspoken about the importance of national service in the past. Do you think we now need to reconsider a military draft in a time of war and with expanded need, as you just described?
I do not believe we need or would find useful a draft. The training required for young men and women today in the military is extensive. The military that we have today, by all accounts, is the most professional, the best equipped, the best trained, and the most effective. So why would we want to destroy that? What I think we need to do is build on it. And finally, you know, we might say we're going to have a draft that's fair to everybody, but we never have. We never have. And so I have no confidence that wealthy people would find a way out of the draft, and we would ask the lowest economic rung on our ladder to serve.
Why think that 130,000, 160,000 can do it? A lot of people aren't going to be satisfied with the answer that you have trust in David Petraeus, because even if he's the best general on the planet, he can only work with the tools that he has.
Well, he can, but he also assured me that if he thought he needed more, he would tell the President and the American people. I'm aware of everything that goes on in Iraq, or a lot that goes on in Iraq, but I'm not the on-the-ground commander. He is, and I have to rely on his judgment. And his judgment so far has been very good. We are achieving significant success on the military front. Even the severest critic, or most of the severest critics of the war, would agree with that.
Every candidate is positioning him or herself in some way for the race. For you, one way you get charged with a flip-flop is your opposition to the Bush tax cuts originally and your embrace of making them permanent. Can you square that, or is that for consumption in the Republican primaries?
I had tax cuts of my own I objected to the Bush tax cuts because I saw a war coming, but most importantly, there was no restraint on spending. My proposal for tax cuts was that we would have a restraint on spending. If that had been enacted today, I think Republicans would still be in a majority, and we'd be talking about further tax cuts. I am convinced that if you now don't make the tax cuts permanent, then it has the effect of a tax increase on every family, business, and individual in America. So, of course, I don't want to do something that would have the effect of a tax increase.
We're here in New York, where we went 75% for Gore and Kerry in New York City. Many of my listeners are thinking, hasn't Bush been a terrible president? A bad war, badly managed at very least, tax cuts that were badly designed at very least, by your description, divisive as can be at home and abroad at a time when we need unity. Hasn't he been a terrible president?
I think the judgment of history about President Bush will be largely related to whether we succeed or fail in Iraq, and that's not clear yet. We've also had one of the strongest economic periods of prosperity in our history. We've also created millions of jobs. There's a lot of, we have not had another attack on the United States since 9/11, when every expert in New York City believed there would be another one, but between now and that period. So historians judge presidents largely on foreign policy / national security issues, and the results are not in. I happen to like the president. We have a good working relationship, and clearly I would not have conducted the first 4 years of the war in Iraq under Rumsfeld, and that, in my view, may earn a very harsh criticism from historians.
We have a minute left. You seem to do well as the underdog. People liked you in that role in 2000. Now that you have hit a kind of political bottom, perhaps, people are starting to talk about you again in more positive terms. Is that what it takes for John McCain to be politically surging and make your one last case to New Yorkers that they should consider John McCain on February 5th?
First of all, we've had ups and downs in every campaign, and we certainly have had them in this one. I'm confident now that Labor Day is well over. People start in New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Iowa start focusing on the candidates. I can out-campaign anybody. The town hall meeting, the retail politics, we don't need a lot of money. I'm confident that I will do well. I'm the most fortunate American or person you have ever interviewed, and I'm grateful for the life I have. We're going to outwork everybody, and we're going to do fine. And to New Yorkers, I would like for you to know that this city is unique in the world. I intend to do everything I can to be of assistance to make it even greater and build on the successes of their former mayors. And this mayor is one of the great ones, I think, in Michael Bloomberg.
Take me there one level deeper. How is New York unique in the world and great, and how would your policies make it greater?
It's unique in the world in that the financial, cultural, and many other ways it is the center of our universe. It has the most diverse background, where we've mixed the blood of the world into making it the most vital and vibrant society in America. It has an incredible impact on the world in every possible way, whether it be art or whether it be finances or whether it be culture. And the people of New York are the most sophisticated and cosmopolitan. And so, and I believe that many citizens of New York City, whether they be Democrat or Republican, will examine the candidates, because we are in very difficult times, not only here in the United States, but in the world.
McCain Bloomberg or Bloomberg McCain in 08 if you don't get the nomination?
I don't think so. I think that I am the party of Abraham Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan, and I wouldn't want to leave it.
Senator McCain, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you again.
That interview first aired on this program in October 2007. I'm Marty Goldensohn, sitting in at Brian Lehrer Live. Before there was Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert, there was George Carlin. Back in October, Brian sat down with George in a radio interview on WNYC to talk about the intersection of politics and humor.
I would have been out here a little bit sooner, but they gave me the wrong dressing room, and I couldn't find any place to put my stuff. And I don't know how you are, but I need a place to put my stuff. So that's what I've been doing back there, just trying to find a place for my stuff. You know how important that is. That's the whole meaning of life, isn't it? Trying to find a place for your stuff. That's all your house is. Your house is just a place for your stuff. If you didn't have so much goddamn stuff, you wouldn't need a house. You could just walk around all the time. That's all your house is. It's a pile of stuff with a cover on it. You see that when you take off in an airplane and you look down and you see everybody's got a little pile of stuff. Everybody's got their own pile of stuff. And when you leave your stuff, you gotta lock it up. Wouldn't want somebody to come by and take some of your stuff. They always take the good stuff. They don't bother with that crap you're saving. Ain't nobody interested in your 4th grade arithmetic papers. They're looking for the good stuff. That's all your house is. It's a place to keep your stuff while you go out and get more stuff.
Do you have all your stuff?
I think I do. I brought at least a portion, at least enough for this purpose.
That's good. That's good. It's great of you to come. You're from New York originally. Where'd you grow up?
Upper West Side, 125th in Amsterdam, 123rd in Amsterdam, West Harlem, White Harlem, Morningside Heights, call it what you like.
You've always made a thing about calling it White Harlem.
That's
when you were
right.
a kid.
It sounded tougher, you know. If you go to a dance in another neighborhood, some guy rolls up and says, "Hey, where you from, man?" If you say Morningside Heights,
you're going to get beat up.
You could.
Yeah.
But if you say White Harlem, man, they say, "Oh, okay."
I read that as early as 5th grade, you listed your career ambitions as comedian, announcer, impersonator, DJ.
Yeah, didn't seem like I needed attention. Trumpet player was in there, too. Actor was in there, too.
I missed that one.
Announcer and actor. Yeah, anything to stand up in front of people and have them say, "Ain't he cute, ain't he clever?"
But at 10 years old, you knew what you were about.
That's right. I really did.
What kind of material were you doing in elementary school?
Well, I was a mimic, and I was drawn toward the Danny Kaye type of verbal gymnastics. I liked songs like "Quanta le gusta, le gusta, le gusta, le gusta, le gusta, le gusta, le gusta," things that were challenging verbally and vocally. And I made up things. I stole imitations of people that I heard on the radio on Horace Heidt or Ted Mack's Amateur Hour. And I just, was a kind of like a kid who needed attention and approval and got it that way. As I began in the 1960s, 62, especially when I broke up with my partner and became a single, I always described myself in the interviews.
You're talking about professionally now.
Yes, that's right. After I had established a little bit of momentum, not a great deal, but just enough to be interviewed by people, I would always let them know that I wrote my own material. I was always proud of that. I would say I'm a comedian who writes his own material, which is the way I thought of myself. Proud of it because a lot of comedians don't and didn't, still don't. And somewhere along the way, I discovered I'd become a writer who performed his own material, which was a significant thing for me to discover because it moved me out of solely entertainment into artist as well. I mean, because a writer creates out of nothing, out of his observations, out of what he or she sees around him. So,
and another way that people describe your genre, maybe you use this term, is observational comedy.
Well, yes, what you say is correct, but then I have a slight modification. I think all comedy, all writing, all art is observational. It all stems out of what we see. I think what they mean by observational is, what would be funny if your fingernails grew a little longer and you didn't, that kind of thing, the Seinfeld stuff. And I did a lot of that at one time. And I kind of went through periods of subject matter or direction, and finally have kind of arrived at a place where a lot of it is language oriented or social commentary. I think, not to take myself too seriously, but that's what it amounts to.
Let me go back. As we were saying, you were arrested in 1972 in Milwaukee. Was that for the 7 Dirty Words routine?
Well, I was doing my act, which had all of those words in it anyway. And the problem there was it was a thing called Summerfest 1972, and it's done every year at the Lakeside in Milwaukee. It's a big exposition kind of fair midway thingy, and the stage for the shows is outdoor, and the audience is all outdoor, and so the speakers carry beyond the perimeter of the theater itself.
Oh, that was the legal excuse?
That was the reason. One of the policemen actually said, "Mommies heard this." And
there certainly were no mommies in the audience.
There certainly weren't. Well, I'm sure that, you know, we had our share of every type of person, but apparently they had the photo I have is magnificent of them walking me away. There are 6 policemen. And I have on sandals because I was wearing sandals at that time. I had my beard. I looked in this picture remarkably like Jesus, although I had denims on. And these 6 policemen, and I still have this magnificent front page photograph. My thought was, you know, this was a verbal offense. This was called disturbing the peace, and it was not violent. It wasn't physical. 6 policemen devoted to this. You know.
If you think the Catholic Church was behind the cops going after Lenny Bruce in Chicago that time, what was the underlying reason that act? Because you were doing the same material all over the country.
Yeah, yes.
Why there and then?
I think. Well, I can't say these things now on the radio, which would illustrate it clearly. But I mean, I was talking to the audience and saying the part of the routine was about substituting the word F with a K on the end, which they do in newspapers, as if you're not supposed to know what came in the middle.
With asterisks.
Yes.
Substituting the word.
Substituting that word for the word kill. And I had a routine about that, and some of the formulations of that sounded really, you know, odd to the untrained ear, or the ear that didn't like me.
Or get what you were doing. Well, here is a clip of George Carlin from a 1978 HBO special riffing on dirty words.
Well, we have more ways to describe dirty words than we actually have dirty words. They call them bad words, dirty, filthy, foul, vile, vulgar, coarse, in poor taste, unseemly, street talk, gutter talk, locker room language, barracks talk, bawdy, naughty, saucy, raunchy, rude, crude, lewd, lascivious, indecent, profane, obscene, blue, off-color, risque, suggestive, cursing, cussing, swearing, and all I could think of was
Do you like our quick succession of bleeps there?
Yes, that was excellent. Fast, a quick hand.
And just a few years ago, I read that a Republican congressman introduced a bill to make sure those words in the routine, although I gather he left one out, the one that starts with T, nearly ends with T, and has an S at the end, has that one was excluded for some reason. But you know, it's 2003, 2004. Congressmen are still reacting to your 1977 dirty words routine.
It's a sign of how deeply injured humans have been by religious superstition and fear, the guilt and shame and fear that comes from religious superstition about the body, about the sexual parts of the body, about the functioning of the body. They just can't handle it, and they're going to run from it and try to cover it up as long as they can.
Do you think the place of banned words in our culture has changed in these 35 years?
I don't know how to define or describe the place of bad words in our culture. No, I think there's the culture has been more vulgarized, and by that I mean it's lowered itself to what the people are as opposed to what the thinkers are, and I don't know if that's good or bad. It's unattractive. You know, it's a hard. I can't read.
Now, well, now we have. Well, let me. I'll ask you it this way. Now we have earnest African Americans leading movements to ban the N-word in hip hop.
Yeah.
We have Isaiah Thomas under attack Knicks coach, for calling an employee the B word and saying it's not the same as when white people do it. We have Don Imus. What do you think of the whole debate over race and dirty word, those words, the B word, the H word, the N word?
Well, first of all, and sometimes liberals refer, when we talk about the people who don't want to be called liberals, they say they don't want to say the L word, and they don't want to say the D word, the deficit word, and they don't want to say the R word. This is a sign of how fearful we are of free expression in this country, is in that we can't even utter some of these words that are all right. We've had to take something, the B word, the F word, we've had to take something that's been reserved for profanity previously and apply it to ordinary words now, which to me is just a sign of how uncomfortable we are with expression and free expression. And race is just, I never expected censorship to come from the left. It always historically had come from the right. I was used to that. And here came these campus liberals with their speech codes, and I have an awful lot to say about that, but it's lengthy and it takes some time.
Did you have a position on the firing of Imus?
Yes, I don't think he should have been fired. That's a position. I mean, it's harder to talk about it as an there are so many aspects to it that bear attention that you can't do it in sound bites, you know.
Ethan in Manhattan, you're on WNYC with George Carlin. Hi.
Hi, Ethan.
Hi, George. How are you doing?
Eaton, that's what we call you, Eaton.
Right. You had some material like that.
How you doing?
The first CD I ever bought was FM and AM.
Oh, good,
and
thank you.
Over the years, I've noticed that your comedic tone has changed drastically. You know, you used to do kind of light bits that usually used your voice, and now you have dark bits. And 10 or 20 years ago, you learned to perform an entire act about death and suffering like you had in Life is Worth Losing.
Yes.
Now, you've always been about pushing the envelope in people's comfort zones. So is that what this is? And also, how are you able to mine such dark subjects for such funny material?
Well, it's not so much deliberately trying to establish new ground or push an envelope or anything. What it is trying to explore the things that interest me, the things that consume my imagination sometimes, and that I think are, yes, in some cases, things that people will squirm a little about. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's what art is about. I think art should challenge received wisdom, received notions, the things we're comfortable with, and make us look at things in a little different way. Now, I don't sit around thinking to myself, gee, I'm an artist, I have to do this. I don't take myself that seriously. But I do know that these things happen without your monitoring them to me. They happen to me without my trying or even knowing.
You've been quoted saying elections only give us the illusion of choice. That's how you feel?
Yeah, I think Americans are led to feel free by the illusion of choice all through this culture. I mean, the only choice you really have in this country is paper or plastic. That's it. Cash or credit, diet or regular, Coke or Pepsi. We don't really have choices in this country.
Do you not believe in electoral democracy?
No, I think, first of all, if you look at the structure of the political process, the electoral process in this country, the haphazardness, the illogic of some of the steps, the primary system, the electoral college, the voting, where we can't get hardly half of these citizens to vote even, pardon the bad grammar there, the fact that immediately upon election, re-election begins. The cycle begins over for the person who's been elected. They have to raise money. They have to please people. They have to pay off debts. The lobbyists come to town with all of their money and get what they want, essentially. They pretty much, big pharmaceuticals, big agriculture, big insurance, big real estate, big oil, you know the big.
So we know all that.
Well, all right, that's why I'm saying that's why I don't believe in this process, and I think it needs to be blown up.
So is real choice attainable? Has any country ever met those standards?
I don't think so. I think, see, I divorced myself from the human race a long time ago and from this culture, this nation, because I think the human race has chosen to organize itself poorly. I think we were given great gifts. We were given this opposable thumb the ability to walk upright, binocular vision, and the mind that could distinguish between the objective and the subjective. And we have used these gifts to produce tequila lollipops that have a worm in the middle, pancakes that'll make, cell phones that'll make pancakes. You know, it's an absurdity. We have been diverted with toys and gizmos from our lives being stolen from us in this country.
But to say you've divorced yourself from the human race,
Yes.
it's such a big statement. It backs up what the previous caller said, which is that you've gotten more cynical over time.
Cynical is a word that I apply to people like the Ford Motor Company, who chose to continue to make the Ford Pinto when the gas tanks were exploding because it would have been cheaper to pay off the widows than it would be to retool. That's cynicism.
How do you characterize yourself?
As a skeptic and a realist. Now, I buy the fact that there is a definition of cynic that fits me, and I'll take that. That's fine. Because about the human race, I want to say, what happened, and that's a dramatic and overly melodramatic way of putting it. What happened was, at some point I realized I didn't see a good ending to any of this. You can smell the end coming. You can smell it. We don't know. We've already had peak oil. We've already had peak water in the Southwest and the Southeast. People don't know this. They go about their business. And I felt that in fact, it just happened, I described it to myself afterward. I found that by divorcing myself emotionally from any interest in a certain outcome, without being a cheerleader for a result, I could detach myself emotionally and be more of an objective writer. I could look at things more fairly from my point of view.
But I think that in the 60s and 70s, your work gave a lot of young people hope about the future.
That's true.
You articulated what a lot of kids thought was absurd about the established view of words and war and God. But by saying it out loud and making fun of it, you gave people hope that things could be different. Did you ever see your work that way?
Not from my perspective. If I read that someone said that, I would say, oh, I can kind of see that. But when they say, for instance, to me, do you try to make people think? I say, no. That would be the kiss of death. Really, it would. If you went out at the door every morning, I'm going to make people think.
Because then you couldn't make them laugh, and then you wouldn't be heard.
I just want them to know I'm thinking. And I know that laughter opens the doors to perception. It allows a thought to get in, because you're completely unguarded and zen-like when you're laughing.
So are you a modern man in this sense? Do you use the web?
I do. I use the tools available. I don't over-involve myself with people say, well, you're selling DVDs, and if you think this is such a bad culture, how come you're selling tickets? Well, somewhere along the way, a person has to accommodate themselves, which is another word for compromise, has to compromise with the system as it is in order to function. The stark choice is to live in the woods and make clothing out of trees and bark and eat mushrooms. The other thing is to be fully involved and to be a horrifying citizen. I try to take as much out of this culture as I can use to work against it.
Is the internet good for democracy?
I think this whole movement toward user content, to use a term for everything else, for broad-based people generating things, I think it's very good. I don't know if it's good for democracy. I think it's good for humanity.
And that's it for tonight's show. We're here Wednesday nights at 7:30 and podcast at CUNY.TV. Next week, comic books replace books in the classroom. And don't forget Brian's daily radio show, weekday mornings at 10 on WNYC, 820 AM, 93.9 FM. I'm Marty Goldensohn. Brian will be back right here next week. Have a great night.